Hello, patrons, questies, and welcome to Storytime with Nathan, Storytime with the Writer. Not quite sure I'm going to call this, but it's just me. It's just me here for this episode because summer's pretty busy for us, and I want us to focus on recording the main content. So you're just getting me today. And I thought, what could I do by myself? I can't improvise by myself. That's pretty lame. I don't want to tell stories with the characters that Jake and Jamie play. That'd be pretty lame. And then I realized I've been world building Palaedom for years. And along the process, I've written a couple of short stories. Some of these short stories explore events and places that we've already talked about. And some talk about things that we have not discussed in the show at all. And so I'm going to be reading a selection of those stories. Right now I've got 3 of them pulled up, and we'll see how long that takes. If it's not an hour, then I might read a 4th one, but I think these 3 are pretty good. 2 of them are relatively short, and the 3rd one's a bit longer. But I'm going to be reading each of these. I'm going to be explaining to you before I read them just kind of why I wrote them, when I wrote them, in the process, how that came about, and then I'll just read you guys the stories. If you like them, obviously you can let me know on the Discord or on Patreon, and I might post them as just like text files if you want that, if that's something you're interested in. Otherwise, you can enjoy the audio file as it is. So, without further ado, get comfy, get cozy, and let's listen to some stories. Okay, our first story is simply called Costarine. It was something I wrote for a fiction writing class that I took in college. This was written in, I got a date on it because it was a homework assignment. September 15th, 2017 is when this last draft was done. And it's just a short piece that's supposed to explore a location and help you get to know a place better. So it's pretty short, and it's obviously a place that we have been before quite a bit. But because I'm releasing this on the Sun Festival, I thought it'd be a great place to start with doing a little exploration piece on Costarine. So I haven't actually proofread this since I wrote it. I just remembered I wrote the story. I thought it'd be good to read. So yeah, let's read this story called Costarine. The city is Costarine, a thriving harbor in the kingdom of Glenwood. Trade vessels sail by every day. Most take refuge in this old city before continuing their journey. The city is easy to spot from the sea because of its ancient walls. The walls are tall and made of weathered stone, each citizen claiming that their great-great-grandfather laid the first one. Mighty royal ships and small fishing boats rest at the creaking docks, each vessel proudly cared for by its owner. Inside the algae-covered walls are merchants walking up and down the cobbled streets. The merchants stop at the butcher to pick up their supper. Each roast carved with care and always freshly killed. At least that's what they're told. Meanwhile, Mr. Miller is mixing the local street crows with the farm chickens. It is what makes his signature flavor. Mr. Miller is teaching his son the recipe, just like his father did. Next, the merchants stop at the tailor. The clothes are imported from foreign lands. Turavian sandals, Weltish robes, and Cavanian scarves. Those who live in the East District buy as many original garments as they can, so as to look like all their neighbors. Meanwhile, those who live in the Merchant District get by with a new cloak or a pair of shoes every winter, if trade has been good. And those who live between the houses take honor in displaying their family antiques, each stain and hole containing a story. After that, the merchants visit the candlestick maker. He has just taken on an apprentice from out of town. The baker's wife says that this new fellow is a criminal, a murderer, even some kind of wizard. The milkmaid says she sees him sneaking out at night and kidnapping children, though no children have yet to be misplaced. The net weaver claims she saw him climb on a roof and howl at the moon. Of course, no one has talked to the stranger yet. They just pick up their candles and leave. Down the street is the Burning Lantern Inn. Joshua Mayers runs the place. His wife has the jewelry to show for it. Every sailor, trader, explorer, soldier, and court official that comes to town pays Jonathan a handsome fee. Between drinks, they each tell stories of faraway places, or of the happenings that take place outside the walls. But Joshua just counts his coins. seeing how high he can stack them. He's thinking about buying a house in the Eastern District. His new home would be just a few streets north of the Duke's Manor. He would be able to hear the music and smell the weekly feasts. He would hear the carriages roll by and see the dolled-up nobles. The ladies and lords were loved and hated by the merchants. One day they would buy the most expensive dress or bowl. The next day they would whine about the low thread count or a smudge on the polish. The Duke himself is large and red. It is a rare spectacle to see him leave his manor, and rare still to see him at all. This is because he stays inside doing hardly anything at all. Messengers on horse come to and fro, bring letters with the king's seal. The messengers also bring lots of letters to Dr. Erickson. He is not only the town physician, but also member of the royal council. Between stitching up the wounded fishermen and aiding the sick children, he sends advice to the king about important matters. He says where the fort should be built, or how much to raise important taxes, or which prince is best suited for his daughter. No one is sure how Dr. Erickson wound up in his position, for he is far too busy to tell anyone. The messengers and merchants then leave through the western gate. Past all the shops and the great fish fountain, you can see a schoolboy next to a young girl trying to throw pebbles into the fish's mouth. They laugh, not knowing about the burdens outside their wall. Unaware of the wars and plagues and famines, all they can think about is how long until the Sun Festival is, or what they'll spend their coins on. They see so many travelers from around the world, yet they only think about their own life, because all that matters is what happens here. That is Costarine. So there you go. That's the story. If I were to guess when I imagined that taking place, it would probably be around the time period of the OG Knight's Quest, because this was before we recorded the podcast. So that was my time setting for a lot of these stories. But yeah, I do consider that canonical. Maybe a word or a name change here or there, but yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's our first story, Costarine. This next one is called Today I Saw a Giant. We're going to be talking about something that we have not discussed at any point in Knight's Quest at all. So get ready for some new content. Will it come up in the show? Well, maybe. I don't know. But I think it's just a fun little short story that I'm quite proud of. So yeah, here we go. It's called, as I said already, Today I Saw a Giant. An observation of a goat herder in the year 650. Today I saw a giant. Yes, I know, many have claimed this before, but I swear to you, he was real. He was hard to spot at first, which is strange, for his size was colossal. But there's a reason not everyone claims to have seen a giant. I was heading north on the road, with the border plains to the west and the Oraton Mountains to the east. I've traveled this road many times, as it leads from my humble mountain home to this town in the valley. I was on my way here to sell my goat milk, as I usually do. The sky was overcast, but I could still see the blue in the sky. The clouds rolled and crawled over the plains. A soft breeze accompanied them, and I found peace in their journey. I smiled as I watched them move into the mountains, crashing and falling away. That was when I saw him. I saw that one cloud was hugging the cliffs, shifting, yes, but not fading away. I stared for quite some time, entranced by the stationary cloud, until it wasn't stationary anymore. The cloud rose up, towering over the peak. I could make out 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. One arm seemed to be holding onto the mountain as it leaned over the plains. It slowly turned its head, a billowing beard following its gaze. The movements were slow, and I would not have noticed if I had not already been watching. But there he was, a giant. I've heard the stories of these giants, just as you have. I've heard from old farmers how they saw the giant in the early light of dawn. I've heard tales from the widows on the street, spinning their yarns to the children. I even heard a tale told by mine uncle, who swore on all he had that his story was true. I doubted them all, but not anymore. I don't know what I expect you to do with this information, but I had to tell someone. I saw him again. At least I saw another giant. I do not know if it was the same or another. I will admit, I had been thinking much about the cloud giant since I saw one a month ago. I had tried to capture its likeness with charcoal, but my skills in art are lacking. Our entire family has grown sick of this story, except for you, of course, which is why I must tell you of this second encounter. This time I was tending my herd. They were in a section of the cliffs that require less of my focus, and my mind grew to drifting. As I looked across the border plain below, I wondered how it was possible for such a large creature to exist and for it to not leave much damage in its wake. My simple goats shred up grass and knock over stones. How much more destruction could one of them cause? The sky was full of large and climbing clouds. They billowed and sailed up into the heavens. They towered ahead and made the mountains seem quaint in their shadow. The afternoon light turned their hues into shades of gold and pink, even giving some of them a soft halo. As I was watching them pass, giving my herd little mind, was when I spotted him. Again, it started with him rising. It was as if he were waking from a long nap. He started off as a bundle of clouds clumped onto another, but I soon saw his arms stretch out from the rest of him. His legs descended onto the earth below, and his head lifted up. The afternoon sun shone through 2 holes in his head, giving him the appearance of glowing eyes. He was even larger than I had previously envisioned, as I now had the terrain below for scale. Where his feet touched the ground, I could see mist spread, and a soft shower of rain cascade upon the hills. His movement was still slow, though I wonder if this was his normal pace or an effect of his previous rest. No matter. He began to walk, lifting up his legs and lumbering southward. I knew not where he headed. Did he have a home? Did he need to find food? Was there someone he was looking for? These questions flew through my mind as I watched for the better part of an hour. But just as he was almost out of my view, he turned around and looked at me. From so many miles away, he had seen me. Or at least it felt like he had seen me. I do not know if he had noticed such a small detail on a mountain far away, but I could feel him. The glow from his eyes had nearly faded as the sun was nearly set, but there was still a warmth to it. I must still think about this some more tonight before I sleep. Thank you for letting me recount my tale to you, my brother. It was him. I swear. That was no normal storm that you just heard. I know I have grown obsessed with this giant, but I have never lied to you. Please, my dear, let me tell you what I saw. I rushed back here to tell you as quickly as I could. Thank you. I shall keep it brief for you. While tending to my herd today, a goat scampered away from the rest. I followed behind him, and it led me to a cliff I have only been but once. Thankfully, the goat was not injured, but I had worn myself out tracking him. So I sat down on the cliff to catch my breath. I looked over the plains once more, and soon saw a sight unlike any I've seen before. This time, there were 2. The giants were facing each other, arms raised, fists clenched for battle. One giant was covered in dark gray patches, the other had only a few. This giant was larger and had its fist above the other. As it brought its fist down upon the smaller giant, I saw lightning burst from where it made contact. Soon after, I heard the rumble of thunder. It shook me thoroughly, and I was filled with awe. I smiled with joy as I knew I was witnessing something truly remarkable. I continued to watch as this fight continued. They took turns exchanging blows. Each punch caused a crackling of lightning and a resounding boom of thunder. This lasted for what must have been an hour. Remind you, their movement was not quick, and several minutes were between each blow. The continuous flashes and cracks of the storm could have been seen and heard for miles around, yet I was the only one who knew the true cause from up on the cliff. As they fought, I saw them decrease in size, as parts of them were blown away by the exchange. They grew darker as they were bruised by the storms within them. Finally, the smaller giant, who was even more so by this point, fell to his knees. The larger giant towered over him, soaking in his victory. I could not help but feel a sense of pride, as if it were I who had won. My giant, the champion, the victor. It was at this point that the goat bleated. I had nearly forgotten about him, and he had run out of grass on this plateau. So I rushed back to the herd with the goat under my arm, and after locking them all in their fence, I rushed here to tell you this tale. I swear, my dear, on the soul of my departed mother, this story is true. Yes, this was all done by the giant I saw today. Thank you for bringing me in and giving me something warm to drink. The blanket and fire would have been help enough. I did not know that there was anyone living up so far on these mountains. Yes, I shall tell you what happened to me. I'm honestly more surprised someone wants to hear it. As I mentioned earlier, I have grown consumed by the cloud giants. My family, including my brother and my wife, have lost patience with me. They say it has distracted me from my work and taken over my waking and sleeping mind. There is truth in what they say, but they would sympathize if they too had witnessed the power of these creatures. So I decided I needed to see one up close. I knew the only way to accomplish this goal was to find one on the mountains. If I saw one on the plains, it would just be cloud and mist, weather like normal. This is why I set off up your mountain. I was prepared with goat skin and gloves, fine boots, plenty of rations, and a yak-lined bedroll. It took me many days to summit the peak, but when I did it, I took in a view unlike my eyes had ever witnessed. To the east, I could see a vast expanse of water. I had not seen the raging sea before. It was much greater than I had pictured in my head. To the west, the entirety of the border plains was in my view. Southward only extended more mountains, and it was to the north that I saw him. At first his back was to me, and I only perceived a mighty cloud. But as he turned, I could not mistake the soft glow from his eyes. His formidable beard cascaded over the mountains, and his hand rested on the ledge beside me. His entire head was larger than any building in town. The form of his nose even overshadowed my length by 3 or 4 times. I was frozen in place, and only partially due to the cold wind wrapping around me. My bones shook from the wonder, and a frozen tear slid down my cheek. I did not regret my assent to meet him, but I wonder if I could have avoided what came next. It was clear that he saw me. Not just looked in my direction, but truly and really saw me. Sorry, my emotions are still coming to grip that reality. I wonder what he would do with me. Would he ignore me? Greet me? Eat me? No, I now think that he was bothered by my presence, like a fly buzzing around in your room. He meant no malice by it. He mustn't have. I was just invading his space, uninvited. Yes. Yes, that was all. For you see, after a few minutes of soaking in his gaze, a mighty wind came rushing from his mouth. The wind was stronger than any I'd felt before. It was like standing at the source of all gales and torrents. This was what real wind felt like. It instantly froze my coat and pushed me back. I skidded and slipped down the cliff, tumbling as I went. The mixture of frost and bruising came from this descent. I would have been dead have you not found me. And for this, I am grateful. What will I do now? Well, after I have recovered, I assume I shall travel home. I hope my family will still take me. Such a small life I lived. Such a small life we all live, in comparison to the denizens of the sky. I shall try to return to the normal life I've known, and think little of these giants. But I suppose it will be much more difficult than said, for I shall always have these scars to remind me of the day I saw a giant. So, that's the end of that story. There is something that's always intrigued me about cloud giants that are actually made of clouds that loom over the mountains. There's something about in the summer when I see these towering cumulus clouds, just these gigantic, huge clouds that contain thunderstorms or could. And I see those and I think how big those clouds really are. And I picture, what if they were alive? What if they were giants? And so that's something that's fascinated me for a while. So that's why I wrote this story after a summer. I think it was last year, summer of 2021, that I wrote this story. So I hope to explore the idea of giants more in the future of our storytelling here in Knight's Quest, but that will not be something that comes up in season 3. It would be season 4 at the earliest, maybe later. So let me know if you want more giants stuff. Okay, our third story is another story that I wrote for my fiction class. This was written in November of 2017. And this was one of our more final projects. It wasn't like the final project that I wrote, but it was one of the later, like, fuller stories, fuller short stories, instead of just like a little writing exercise. So this one's a bit longer, and it talks about some places and some events that I don't know if we've really talked about. Well, we've definitely not talked about it in the Knight's Quest show. Maybe we've alluded to it in some of the other Patreon episodes. I'll let you know when we get to the end of it. Again, have not read this in quite a few years. I mean, it's almost been 4.5 years since I wrote this. Wow. So, without further ado, let's get into the story titled Dented Armor. Peter rode into the village of Aberdale on his horse. His armor was dented and covered with blood and dirt. Sweat dripped from his brow, and he breathed heavily. Peter saw the sign of a tavern, a place where he could rest. He got off his horse and marched into the building. It was warm inside. The tavern wasn't crowded, with only a few customers milling about. A man slept in the corner, having drunk too much. A young couple laughed to each other at a table. The room smelled of fresh bread and ale. The light from the fire gave the stone walls an orange glow. Antlers in a bear head hung above the bar. Then Peter saw him, a fellow soldier. He recognized his rank by the purple sigil on his shoulder. The other soldier sat at the bar, slumped over a glass of ale, his eyes sunken, and his face was scruffy and worn. His hair cut short, revealing a few scars. Peter sat down next to him, giving a nod of recognition. The other soldier looked up at him and smiled. "It's good to see another set of armor that doesn't belong to a damn Cordian." His face was gruff and low, matching his exterior. Peter nodded his head and looked to see what the bar served. "Say," asked the stranger, "were you by any chance at the Battle of Crosswood?" Peter turned back to look and raised his helmet visor. Yes, I just came from there. Why do you ask?" The stranger smiled. "I was just there myself. I had been stationed at Mosswell before, and let me tell you, I'm glad to be out of that Cordian dump. I heard there were going to be others who were repositioned here. I was hoping you might be one of them." Peter nodded again. Yeah, that's me." The soldier extended his hand. "I'm Wilbur." "Peter." He shook his hand. "Pleasure to meet you." Wilbur took a drink from his glass. "So, can I get you a beer?" Peter took off his helmet and set it on the table. "Sure, I'll take one." "A round for my friend, miss," Wilbur signaled to the barmaid. "Tell me," he said, as the barmaid filled Peter's glass, "how did you fare at the Battle of Crosswood?" Peter stared at his helmet, tracing his finger over the dents. "It was, tough." Wilbur set down his glass. "I think it was for all of us. Those Cordians were ruthless, nearly destroying the Cavanian army." He looked down at the wooden floor and back to Peter. I know we've just met, but it's useful to talk about this kind of thing. To at least get it off your chest." Peter continued to trace his finger on his helmet, circling the ridges. "Well, if you ever change your mind, I'm sure we'll be seeing each other around again." He finished off his ale and stood up. "Drink a little. It helps." Then he walked out. Peter picked up the glass, stared at its golden contents, and set it back down. He was about to just get up and leave when the barmaid walked by again. "Is there something wrong, sir?" she asked. "Oh, no, I was just not thirsty." He forced a smile. It was then that he finally took the time to look at her. She was tall and beautiful. Her hair was the same color as the ale in front of him. Her eyes seemed to pierce through his armor. Peter realized that he hadn't talked to a woman in months. There were only men in his division. His forced smile turned into a real one. "Well, if you need anything else, just let me know." She turned to tend to other customers. Actually, wait, I'm new to Aberdale, and I was wondering if you knew of any good places to spend the night." She turned back to him. "Yes, I do. There's an inn called the Resting Bull. It's got low prices and good accommodations. It's just down the street to the right." "Resting Bull, that's an interesting name." "Well, why is it called that?" "It's a funny story if you have the time." "Please, go on." "Well, I heard it got the name because the owner, before he had the inn, used to be a farmer. His father raised cattle, and one day one of the bulls escaped. The owner hunted after it and found it sleeping in their neighbor's field. The neighbor claimed that since the bull was sleeping on his land, that made it his bull now. So the owner shook the bull awake. The bull, seeing its owner, went back home. The innkeeper named his inn after the story to show that even though he's leaving farming, he's still loyal to his father." I guess I never would have figured that out. Well, what else do I need to know about this town?" She went on to explain a couple other stories about Aberdale's customs. I always found it funny that men in this town buy fresh bread to show their affection. Apparently flowers are overrated. She told him the problem with the town's mayor and how he was a puppet for this war. I once overheard some soldiers claiming that he works for the Cordians and he should be hanged. Do you think it's true? Is he a spy? Peter said. Well, if he is, he's doing a terrible job. Besides, if we call every mayor a traitor because he raised some taxes, we wouldn't have any mayors left. She explained how the town had been stuck in the middle of this war for years, and soldiers were always passing through. She talked for the rest of the night, and Peter mainly listened, only asking questions to keep the conversation going. He was soothed by her calm voice, far different from his sergeant's. He stayed until it was just the two of them left. Well, said Peter, thanks for the stories. They were very helpful. Well, I'm glad I was able to put all this useless information to use. She smiled, cleaning the last glasses. Peter looked out the window and was shocked by how dark it was. Oh my, I didn't realize it was getting late. I should get going. He stood up and was about to leave when she interrupted him. Wait, sir, you forgot your helmet. Oh, of course. He grabbed the helmet in her hands. My name's, Peter, by the way. Peter, how nice. I'm Juliet. The helmet rested in their hands, each dent and scratch representing a blow from a Cordian. Peter took the helmet and smiled, and marched out. As he walked back into the chilly night air, he remained warm, maybe from the fire or the ale, but Peter knew what it really was. He found the resting bull, got a room, and went to bed. It had been a long day. That night he dreamed of Crosswood. He saw the Cordian army riding over the hill. Their green banners were as sharp as their spears. They thundered towards him, standing alone in the valley. Bodies fell around him like rain. He lost count of how many. Redness spread out around him, starting from his left side, contrasted to the green flags that circled around. He could make out his heavy breathing in the screams and stampeding hooves. It echoed through his being. Peter woke up, still breathing heavily. He got up, put on his armor, and went to his assignment. There he joined the rest of his division from the Cavanian army. They had allied themselves with the local forces to put a stop to the Cordian advancement. After their loss at Crosswood, they had to refocus their energy and hold out in Aberdale. Peter ended up finding Wilbur, but didn't talk much to him. He didn't talk much to anyone. He only responded, "Yes, sir," and went along with his day. While training and building defenses, he kept thinking of Juliet. Her eyes possessed his every free moment. When he was dismissed, he found himself walking the long way back to the resting bull, past the tavern. He walked back in and found her wiping down the counter. She looked up and smiled when she recognized him. He sat down at the bar again, setting his helmet to the side. "You returned," she said. "This surprises you?" "Normally only the drunken and angry soldiers return." She filled up a glass and set it in front of him. "It's nice to have someone I can actually talk to. I guess that story of the resting bull really resonated with me, the loyalty part. A man who listens and actually retains information. You really are a rare breed," she laughed. They spent the night talking again. This time, Peter contributed to the conversation. They talked about the weather and the man snoring in the corner. They told a few jokes and spent their time forgetting about the war. This grew to become a habit of Peter's. Every day, he would go and train in the morning and spend the evening talking with Juliet. They had to stay at the tavern because she had to work. Then he would go back to the resting bull and dream about Crosswood. He would see his brother fall off his horse, and the green banners swarm around him. There was always that spear, drawing closer to his left side, taunting him. Then one night, it was storming. The rain was pelting against the window. The tavern was fairly empty. as most of the usuals had opted to stay home that night. But for Peter, this was his new home. When the time came for him to leave, Juliet grabbed his arm. "Wait, don't go out there. It's not safe. The storm is too strong." "But I need to get some sleep. I have training tomorrow. You know this." "Well, maybe you can sleep somewhere else tonight." Peter looked at her hand, which was grabbing his metal plating. The firelight danced on the steel. "Okay, I'll stay here." He put his hand on hers, and they went upstairs to her room. That night, the battle haunted him again. He heard his brother, Simon, scream out to him. He seemed to be miles away. He couldn't stop him from falling. He couldn't catch him. He couldn't even say goodbye. The spear drew closer to his left side, its tip pressing up against his skin. He woke, sweating. His chest rose and fell as he jerked up. Juliet stirred. He forgot she was there. She wrapped her arms around him and pulled him back under the sheets. Juliet pressed her face against the scar on his left side. "What were you dreaming about?" she asked, keeping her eyes closed. The sun was just piercing through the clouds and making its way into the windows. Peter stared at his armor laying against the wall. "Crosswood. I've been having nightmares every night." "Oh?" She lifted her head, looking at him. "I saw my younger brother die right in front of me. I couldn't protect him. I couldn't save him." Juliet listened, tracing her hand over his scar. "If I had run a bit faster or paid closer attention, I could have stopped." She put her finger on his lips. "Don't say things like that." He inhaled deeply, smelling her breath mixed with his. "You're right. I can't waste time thinking about what I could have done. I should focus on what I can do to avenge him." Peter got out of bed and put his armor on. He gave Juliet a kiss and went to his assignment. That day he doubled his efforts. He worked harder at his training and he pulled through the manual labor. He would do everything he could to make sure every Cordian he encountered would die. Whether they were soldier or child, justice had to be paid. When they arrived, he would be ready. He would slay them without hesitation. Simon's death would not be in vain. Wilbur even took notice and encouraged him. On the way to the tavern, Peter was struck by the smell of fresh bread. He remembered what Juliet had told him about Aberdale customs and bought a loaf. He whistled as he walked, skipping over the puddles. He and Juliet had decided he wasn't going to be staying at the Resting Bull any longer. "I have good news to share with you," Juliet said after taking the loaf and setting it on a table next to the bed. "What is it?" Peter said, taking off his chest plate. "Well, as you know, I've been working here every night." "And what a fine job you've been doing. You've turned me into a drunkard," he laughed, removing his boots. "Thanks. Anyway, the reason is because I've been trying to save enough money to bring my family here. I'm not originally from Aberdale, and I moved here for better work, and now I finally have enough." "Well, that's wonderful." Peter set down his chainmail and lifted her up. "We should celebrate." I know exactly how." They spent the night together, and Peter for once slept without any nightmares. Instead, he dreamed of Juliet riding on his horse behind him. He wore no armor, only a sword in his hand. He was slaying Cordians left and right, and he watched as their green banners fell to the ground, trampling them beneath him. No one could oppose him, and everything was going his way. His dream ended. Juliet was still there next to him. "I'm excited for you to meet my family," she said to him. It was soft, like the sheets beneath them. "I think you'll like them." Peter thought about family, about Simon. "That sounds nice. If I sent the money today, they should be here in a few weeks." Where's your family from?" It isn't relevant." She rolled to face away from him. "What? Come on, tell me." Peter sat up. How am I supposed to get to know your family if you don't tell me where you're from? I don't think you'll want to know. He put his hand on her back. Trust me, I do. All right, she inhaled. We're from Moswell. Moswell. Peter had heard that name before. But where was it? And then he remembered. It was in Cordia. You're a Cordian? Yes, I was going to tell you, Peter stood up. You're from Cordia? The country I'm at war with? I'm sorry, I haven't told anyone. I know what they'd do to me if they found out. Peter paced across the room, his cheeks turning red. His mind was flooded with the green banners and the falling bodies. He covered his ears to block out his brother's screams. He bent over, unable to focus. Juliet had deceived him. She had tricked him. He realized that he wasn't wearing his armor. Where had he put it? He turned and saw it shoved in the corner. How could he forget it? How could he forget him? He picked up his sword and pointed it at Juliet. She pulled up the sheets, covering her body. Please, Peter, I don't care about the war. I don't want to live in Cordia anymore. I just want my family to be safe. I want to be with you. How can I trust you? Why should I believe what you're saying? Because I love you, Peter. Peter lowered his sword. No one had said that to him before. And for some reason, he knew she was telling the truth. But then he felt the weight of his sword, heard Simon's screams echoing in his mind, and his righteous anger filled him again. I can't let you live. You're an enemy to the kingdom. Yes, you can. I'll go back to Moswell. I'll go back to my family, she trembled. You could be a spy. You could have come here to gain military information. Is that why you befriended me? Were you trying to use me? He stepped closer, pulling the sword to her neck. No, never, she began to cry. Peter, you know me. You know who I am. I don't know anymore. His hand was shaking. Tell me why I should let you live. Please give me a reason. Killing me won't bring your brother back. Peter stared at her. She was right. It wouldn't. He put the sword down and started putting on his armor, his chainmail, his boots, his chest plate, and his helmet. What are you doing? She asked, getting up from the bed. He sheathed his sword and marched out. Peter! Peter! He left the tavern and found his horse. She stood in the window watching him, too scared to follow, too upset to leave. He got on his horse and rode away from the tavern. Peter was going to head back to his assignment, but kept riding. His armor weighed upon him in a way it hadn't before. Every dent, scratch, and scar a burden. He left Aberdale with no idea of where he would go, as long as it was somewhere new. He knew he would eventually look back, but not today. The wounds needed more time to heal. So there's that story. So there you go. Dented Armor. I remember being quite proud of that one when I first wrote it. Let's see. Does that tie into any other Knight's Quest lore? Cordia is the country where our little spin-off podcast, Trouble in Paradise, took place. Though I do not think this war was happening, because that story happens really early on in Cordia's history. And so this must have been a little bit later. I think I knew what war was supposed to be, but I don't recall now. That was my attempt at writing romance. If you didn't catch my very subtle Juliet reference. Why did I write Peter? I think I picked Peter because of the biblical reference to the apostle or disciple Peter, who was a very passionate, outspoken person, used the sword to try to protect. So I think that was my reason. So I hope you enjoyed those stories. I know this episode's not quite an hour long. I don't know if any of the other stories would quite fit the time length, and I'm kind of feeling like I like those three. I think that's a good little selection. So if you want more, just little world building writing stories, again, let me know. My goal is to have most of the world building history come through Quilber Quest stuff. But if we ever find ourselves in a situation where the three of us aren't able to record a Patreon episode, let me know. I've got some other writings, though most of them aren't short stories. Most of them are just like me doing exposition dumps or like history, like mock history books. And those probably wouldn't be as interesting to listen to, but who knows? You guys like that kind of stuff. So again, feedback. This is a new style. And if you enjoyed it, let me know. If you didn't enjoy it, let me know too. And I'll just pretend like I'm not offended by that, because I wrote these from somewhere between 5 to 1 year ago, and that doesn't hurt my feelings, as we've learned. No, that would still hurt. Yeah, I've rambled long enough at the end of this here. Happy Sun Festival. And yeah, see you guys next time.